Good afternoon and welcome to the Thought Leadership series on inclusion of persons with disability at the workplace. My name is Smita and I represent Interweave Consulting Private Limited. Interweave is a DEI consulting firm focused exclusively on building an equitable and safe workplaces for all. To know more about us and our work and solutions, please visit us on www.interweave.in, or you could also write to us at mira@interweave.in. It's MIRA, mira@interweave.in. In the event today, we will discuss about the RPWD Act, the mandate for private sector organization, the implementation guidelines, and what are some of the implications of non-compliance. To discuss this today, we have Ankit Jindal with us. Ankit wears multiple hats. Along with being a marketing professional at Entity Data, Ankit is also a co-founder of multiple social impact organizations. Ankit has successfully led and contributed to strategic discourses on disability, including the RPWD Act. So it comes as no surprise that Ankit has been invited to many national and international forums and has received numerous awards and recognition. In conversation with Ankit today is our on ground accessibility and inclusion of people with disabilities at workplace, Abha Saxena. Abha is a certified accessibility and inclusion expert. She's also the founder of Social Equity Advisory Services. Social Equity is a consulting company focused on CSR and inclusion of persons with disability. In her previous stint as Vice President Programs with NASCOM Foundation, Abba has successfully led business strategies and disability initiatives for many organizations. Abba is also the advisory board member for many not for profit organizations. Welcome, Abba and Ankit. And before I hand it over to Abba and Ankit, few pointers for our participants today. There is a CC option or a closed caption available on all the three platforms: YouTube, LinkedIn, as well as Facebook. Please use as needed. In case of any further queries, feedback, or to know about us, please write to us at mira@interweave.in. Again, it's MIRA, mira@interweave.in. If you're interested to receive updates about our future events and programs, please fill the Google form. The link is shared in the comment box. And the recording of this event will be available on our YouTube channel. The link of this will be shared on our social media handle. And most importantly, as participants, please keep the comment box flowing with all your thoughts, views, feedback, and especially questions for us. We will try our best to attempt to respond to all those questions in the time available. And now, without much further delay, I hand it over to Abba and Ankit for the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Smita. It's my pleasure to be in conversation with Ankit Rajiv Jindal. Good afternoon, Ankit. Welcome to the conversation. We know that the Persons with Disability Equal Opportunity Protection for Rights and Full Participation Act 1995 came into enforcement on February 7, 1996. This law was an important landmark and was a significant step in the direction to ensure equal opportunities for people with disabilities and their full participation in the nation building. But in December 2016, another Right for Persons with Disability Act was passed, which was notified in June 2017. Even though the Act has been in effect for over 5 years, there are still some ambiguity about the Act. Therefore, my first question to you is, what is the Rights for Persons with Disability or RPWD 16 Act? And what was the need of this new act when one already existed? Over to you.
Thank you so much, Abha and Smita, for having me here. I think it's a fantastic forum, and I'm so humbled to be part of this initiative. So you asked me about what was the need for RPWD Act, and I think you kind of strike the right chord with the PWD Act of 1995. So I always say, the nearly the first 50 years of the 5 decades of India's independence, disability was not even in existence as a disability rights based approach. We didn't even feature in the discourse of, the leadership of the country, right? We were unknown. We were not required, or we didn't exist for them. 95, the first act came in. It moved the needle, and it kind of set the benchmark for what the inclusive India that it was to be. 2007, India was one of the first countries which ratified the UNCRPD, which is United Nations Convention for the Rights of People with Disabilities. Now, this was an international treaty. Several countries have ratified it. Now, as a part of the obligation of ratifying this, India was supposed to make changes to the to the existing law. So when it came to us nearly about 2008, 2009, what was realized that the PWD Act needed to be have at least hundreds of amendments to be made it compliant to the to the CRPD. So that's where the disability sector was kind of meeting in for a kind of a national consultation, and we were kind of dwelling on the PWD Act, and we felt that no, PWD Act was not adequate, and we needed a fresh law. So somewhere in 2009, the sector demanded the government that we need a new law, and by 2014, in fact, the bill was tabled in the parliament. So if you really look at it, the law progressed fast by India standard. It generally takes a lot more. But in 5 years, we were able to kind of bring that bill to the table, and 2016 it was passed. So it was to align us to the CRPD, which, by the way, brings a paradigm shift in the way we think about disability. And of course, we can kind of dwell that a little more.
Yeah, thank you very much. Uh, so, n- uh, uh, so we understand that Rights for Persons with Disability Act 16 was created because it was not we were not able to fulfill the obligations we had on CRPD. Can you talk a little bit more about it? That what exactly was defined in that in the act? What are the aspects of a person's rights which are defined and which are not defined?
So let me start it from a very basic definition of the way we understood disability, right? So
Yeah.
until 95, the way we defined disability was a very medical way of disability. So for us, the disability was understood as a person who had a physical impairment, and all about the disability was about correcting him or her, maybe giving him health rehabilitations or corrective surgeries or whatnot. So the
Yeah.
point was that we always understood disability in a very medical based approach. Now,
Hmm.
the speciality about CRPD is that it brought a new understanding on disability, right? It brought the social model of disability. So where it says that disability is just not about an individual's impairment, but it, in fact, yeah, we may have different types of impairment, but if the environment that I live in, if that is not accessible, or if I encounter barriers, it is then I experience disability. Now, just to help you understand, see, as a person with vision impairment, I might have the intellect to work in a company. But if the company says, I don't hire vision impairment people, or I don't have the infrastructure, that's wrong. But if you enable me with the right kind of a technology or a software, that is where the magic happens. A person on a wheelchair may be very well qualified to be working, but if the building does not have the ramps and the elevator for him, he will not be able to kind of work in that environment. And that's what this RPWD talks about. It brought about a newer understanding of disability. It expanded the types of impairment uh, which we understand. So by the way, the PWD Act only understood 7 types of disability. The RPWD expanded to 21 conditions. And then we also talked about, as I said, there are barriers, the whole social models. So understanding what the barriers are and what kind of interventions that we need to bring in, and that's where we talk about accessibility, be it of built environment, digital, and so on and so forth. So all that were not covered in our previous law. The CRPD kind of brought in non-discrimination. Was a very it may look very counterintuitive, but the fact is that the 1995 Act did not have very strong provisions on non-discrimination. And this is something the RPWD Act brings in, which makes it even a punishable offense for people to be kind of, if they found to be discriminating against people with disabilities. So yeah, there were many, many more reasons, we can possibly go on.
Yeah, yeah. I think people can refer to the act itself, and it is
Yeah,
very well worded and easy to comprehend.
yeah.
One more question I think a lot of people ask and question is, what is the globally accepted terminology for persons with disability? Recently, only some people were having a kind of discussion on that. So I thought maybe
Yeah.
I'll ask you.
Well, that's such a brilliant question, and I would say, globally the accepted terminology is people first language. The Our
Yeah,
law also uses people with disabilities, persons with disability. If you want to use in context of a particular condition, you can say a person with vision disability, a person with hearing disability, a person who's on autism spectrum. So that is the most safest thing. Now we all have a very favorite term called differently abled,
able,
and
especially
uh,
able.
specially abled. Now the fact the word itself says that you are different from us, right?
Yeah,
And this is a terminology which is in the disability sector is said this is a term which is a burden given to us by the non-disabled community. They themselves, in terms of not being political, they're wanting to be politically correct, they've kind of actually made it more patronizing.
yeah.
Similar goes, and I'm sorry for the political views, I'm a great fan of the current government, but one thing which I've not been really very happy about is the use of the word divyang. uh,
Divyanjan.
they've just kind of made it like a whole individual with a holy or a a divine body. And it's such a uh, petty thing that, while you on one hand call us divyang, those with divine abilities, and on the other hand lack of accessibility doesn't even allow us to enter to our places of worship. So yeah, I would say persons with disabilities, I think when in doubt use that. There are a few, just a caveat, there are a few things, few groups like autism, they like to refer as autistic. There are some groups like deaf, they want to refer it as deaf. uh, there are, that there are only very few exceptions which will go with an identity first approach. But yeah, I think in generally, the when in doubt use this think, we
Safest
go with the persons
terminology.
first.
Yeah,
Persons with first, this actually expands on the social model of disability.
yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. So let's get into the most relevant question for our forum today. And this is the first time I understand that there is a mandate for private sector organization in the Act. I think PWD Act of 1995 has a mandate for public sector organization and governmental organization, but private sector was not mentioned. So, can you please tell us more about that? What are the mandates for private sector organization? Because I've seen that companies are still little, I'll say, not sure that what exactly they need to do and what they can leave.
Yeah, yeah. So great question again, and I think here's I'll request if our colleagues can bring up the slide. What
Yeah,
I've
it's up there.
done is, there are 10 points which I felt is important for the private sector to know about. This will be a little long answer, so bear with me. So
No
yeah, the
problem.
first point is ki, of course we had four laws. As of now, also there are four laws around disability, but RPWD Act is the most relevant for private sector, if I would say. You rightly mentioned PWD Act 95 had the biggest limitation that they did not include private sector in any capacity, be it in reservation, be it in employment, education. Uh, uh, Private sector could just wash their hands off away and, not be inclusive enough. But here I think this law makes it very categoric. There is an They have included the terminology establishment. So in establishment they very clearly articulate private and public sector, and they've also given the definition of private establishment, which includes possibly any and most types of organization types, right from sole proprietorships, private limited company, public limited company, NGOs, uh, and so on and so forth. So essentially, any and every possible type of companies are under the ambit of the RPWD Act. So I think that's very important to know. Of course, we discussed the social model of disability, so I'm not going to dwell on that. Uh, I think number three is an important part, right? Like the law mandates a need of having an equal opportunity policy. Now, what's an equal opportunity policy? It's essentially a policy document from an organization which declares my intent and the practice for hiring people with disabilities. It lays on the policies and the structure. It will also articulate the process for applying. There will be a liaison officer that you need to mention. You need to have information about what kind of a jobs, although job identification is a different thing, we can talk about that. But yeah, the kind of a jobs that is open for people with disabilities, we generally recommend you make all your jobs open, because you can't be mapping 21 disabilities with all your job requirement. It needs to talk about how you capture data and how do you capture grievances for any on account of any complaints. So equal opportunity employee policy must be there. It needs to be created and prominently displayed on your website. This needs also to be registered with the commissioner of disability. Now, we all have multiple offices, so the thumb rule is, if you are headquartered in a particular state, you register your equal opportunity policy with that office of disability. So that is an important thing. Now, the fourth point, it talks about all private establishment with 20 plus employees should appoint a liaison officer. Now, who's a liaison officer? Liaison officer is the one point of contact which will kind of form a bridge between the government and the company, and also is a point of contact for employees or prospects with disability. He or she should be enabling for reasonable accommodation needs during a recruitment process and possibly after onboarding. So this needs to be kind of mentioned and also be registered with the commissioner's office. uh, fifth point is very important, right? There's no reservation for private sector, right? While for the public sector companies there is an explicit reservation of 4%. It was 3% earlier, it has got increased to 4%. But for private sector they have not given any reservation, although the law really talks about, or it encourages private sector to have at least 5% of your workforce of people with disabilities. Now, here is where we need to also understand the nuance on disability. And I think, you know, for reservation, especially in public sector, and we might have some public sector audience, what they say for the reservation, you need to have people with benchmark disability, those who have a certificate of more than 40%. So that needs to be kind of taken care of into. That is only for specific for those organizations which come under the ambit of reservation. Otherwise, you can have people with disabilities across from 1% to 100% ka spectrum. Uh, Let me just take a pause here before I go to the next 6 points. So, Abha, you have any questions where you want me to elaborate on?
Uh, Not at the moment. I think you
Okay.
finish all the 10 points. I have few questions that I will take a little later.
Okay.
Okay.
So let's go to six. Point number six, of course, it's very self-explanatory. No person should be discriminated. Now, here is where you need to understand one thing. Denial of reasonable accommodation can also be construed as a discrimination. Uh, and it is the onus of the employer to provide the reasonable accommodation. So if I need a screen reader, you can't be telling me, "Ki, okay, as a person, please get your own screen reader in my office environment." It is the duty of the employer to kind of make sure that the reasonable accommodation is provided. There should not be any of course you can the word reasonable itself is very debatable, but for most large organization the connotation in fact is moving away from reasonable to everything possible that we can do to accommodate people with disabilities. um, Now, point number eight talks about is a very interesting thing. There are very specific provisions on accessibility of built environment, ICT, and transportation. Now, places of workplace or workplaces are also considered as building, so that needs to be kind of made accessible. The government gave a timeline of June 2022 to make all their built environment accessible. Now, of course, the timeline has gone. There was COVID, so there might be some relaxations around it, but you never know. If the government doesn't decide to extend that timeline, there might be inquiries coming your way. And I've seen this area has the maximum buzz in the recent past, with lots of companies requesting for access audits in their organization. ICT, I think this is an important part, and ICT also comes under the services definition. So this is not only applicable to you as an employer, but also you as a service provider. If you are an e-commerce company, if you are a digital company which are providing services through ICT, you need to make sure that that is made accessible. The timeline was a little in fact, it was in 2019 that we were supposed to be made, but now we are actually seeing a lot of companies kind of in, kind of piquing their interest around this. There was a very recent judgment in by the the Chief Commissioner's Office for Disability on Practo. Now, Practo, I'm sure everybody knows that it's a healthcare app. It provides healthcare services. They've been asked and mandated to kind of make their applications accessible. So you are already seeing that there are positive mandates coming in for for the private sector as far as making their services accessible. So it's a very very important point, and that something that you need to look into it. If say people with disabilities complain to the commissioner's office or the high court, it's more likely or not than not that the courts are going to take a more favorable judgment towards people with disabilities. This is something we've also seen in the global markets. Like if you look up US market and accessibility lawsuits, you realize so many lawsuits are being formed and kind of being lost, and those run into multi-million dollars. So that's a big business incentive that you should make accessible. And by the way, on that related note, in US, you cannot do a business with the government if your apps or a website or your ICT, your products are not accessible. And I can tell you, as an insider to the disability rights movement, we've been lobbying very hard with the government to bring something like that in the procurement. So you might see something like this coming up in India also. Now, nine, I think it's important on the data records. I think it's important that you maintain the records, you maintain the secrecy of it. Please ensure that the privacy of the data is well maintained. Only need to have access be given to those people. And the government, when you're reporting your data to the government, there has to be an aggregate basis unless a specific query is being asked for. And 10, I think there is a carrot and a stick by the government. There are incentives which are given by the government to increase employment for people with disabilities, and then there is also uh, punishments if you don't comply with it. So yeah, there are a whole bunch of efforts, and I think this is a very progressive law and very important points. So yeah, on that note, I complete my 10 points on RPWD and implications on the private sector. Let's understand this a little more. Yeah.
Yeah. So my Ankit, my question is more about the equal opportunity policy, because in my
Yeah.
conversation and otherwise, you might have also seen that a lot of large organizations already have equal opportunity policy,
Hmm.
where there is a mention of persons with disability, but the act
Hmm.
mandates that the companies must have a separate equal opportunity policy.
Yeah.
How necessary it is to have it, or can one just add maybe an additional para or two in the equal opportunity policy, and that should be okay?
See, in most cases, and again, this is where the gray area sets in, but most cases, I would say that it is best to have a separate, elaborated policy for India, because most of the global corporates would have a diversity and equal opportunity policy, and or in that lights about where we talk about it. But the law and the rules also give very specific parameters that it needs to include. The policy should talk about the liaison officer, the recruitment, the job identification, the reasonable accommodation process. So then there are specific provisions. It's good to always elaborate your existing with these points and then get that registered.
Yeah. So about accessibility, I think you have spoken quite in detail, but there is a question which has come in
Mhm.
that is questioning that how government is securing accessibility from their end, like bus stops, vehicles. Does accessibility apply to government too?
Absolutely. And I think I would say that the government is also putting in a lot of effort. I think the efforts or the intent began with the Accessible India campaign in 2015, which was a year before the law was passed. So the government has identified a list of buildings and websites and public transport to be made accessible. Now, the efficacy of or the effectiveness is always questionable because we are a kind of a democracy where there is a center power, there's central state power, and then there is local bodies. So implementation may have fallen through the crack in many cases, but then the government is very conscious of this. They are making a lot of effort in making their built environment accessible. And I will tell you that there are newer buildings that they're bringing about and talking about. And if, say, for whatever reason, if the government would have forgotten, the disability sector is very active and they would have reached out to the government, "Oh, this building does not have right kind of an accessibility. You please ensure that." And the government does incorporate it. Yeah, it's a big country. It will take a long time. As I said, the first 50 years, disability was not even a part of the discourse. So we have to undo a lot of damage which was done over decades. It will take
Yeah.
a little while.
Yeah, understandable. Now, once again, I would like to confirm from you that the timelines for accessibility, for making the build, the build infrastructure accessible has not been increased, because we keep hearing the rumors and people keep saying that it has been increased till 2025.
Oh,
Uh,
no. So 2025, at least the way things stands today, as on 15th of September, there's no official notification by the government on any of the timelines. Just to recapture, there are a few things. For built environment, it was given as June 2022, which was which is already passed. So if your organization is not in compliance, you're already in violation of it as of today. For services, it was June 2019. So again, if your products and services are not accessible, again you are in violation for that. And registering equal opportunity policy, and again this is important, Abha, to for everybody to note.
yeah,
There was no timeline given. So by that mean, you are supposed to be registering your equal opportunity policy now. If you are not done it, you're definitely in kind of a violation for that.
yeah. Yeah, I think that was very important, because I generally tell companies that, yeah, as on yesterday you should have done it. So as soon
Absolutely.
as you create the policy, you must register it.
Yeah.
And what
And
I
in
was in
most cases,
discussion,
it's very simple. In most cases, you just contact the Office of Commissioners of Disability.
yeah,
They may ask you to just send an email or maybe a small little form that you may have to submit. I know that there is a larger effort to standardize the process across the state, but then that will take its own time. Before that, I think you can reach out to your local commissioner's office and get it registered.
thank you very much. I think that was very important response. The next question is about the incentive. But before I
Mhm.
go there, there's
Mhm.
another question from Manjula, which she talks about: are there any tax benefits uh, for the companies who are hiring people with disabilities?
So when you say tax benefit in terms of corporate tax reduction, that's a proposal with the government. That's an idea which is being explored. But as of now, there's no corporate tax benefit for employees. But then there are other types of incentives, and I think I'm just preempting your question. So what the government has done, and one of the most popular one is the the employers don't have to pay the employer's contribution of the provident fund for the employees and the ESIC for people with disabilities.
That
Now,
existed for some time, Ankit.
Yes,
That
so
has
this
been.
actually the policy was introduced in 2007 or 8, in that mid 2000s it was introduced. But the policy came with so many caveats and restriction that it was quite useless or futile for the corporate at that time. But the policy was revamped after the law came in effect. And they have actually expanded the definition in many ways. They've simplified the process. All that you need to be aware is that one, the earlier the restriction was only for employees earning a salary up to 25,000. That capping has been removed. So people or employees across the levels, across irrespective of the salary bands, are now eligible to get this incentive, or rather the company is eligible to take that benefit. I think number two is, earlier the reimbursement was only eligible for a period of 3 years. Now it is expanded to 10 years.
Oh,
So
wow.
that is an important aspect. Um, what I would encourage is ki for the audience is to sync with the department which is managing your provident fund, employees provident fund. I think in most cases we have not declared the employee as a person with disability, because individuals don't have that option to update. Like I cannot go to the FO portal and update my disability status. So the company has to enable this at the back end. And I think there might be a form that needs to be submitted, and after that the government will start paying your contribution towards the employees provident fund. Now this money, I always recommend, so there are two parts of it. Some employer says we will declare this employees disability. If the government is paying extra, let it be added to their corpus for retirement, but we'll continue to pay them. The other is that those who can't afford it, they are saying, okay, we'll use this money that we are saving for providing reasonable accommodation. So there is an incentives that the government is giving, and the similar is an approach for the ESIC, which is the employee state insurance. So that generally the policy is structured for employees, for a certain types or a cadre of employees. So yeah, you can kind of get a similar benefit for that. And then there are certain states which are also offering rebate on professional tax for employees. So say for instance Karnataka has waived off professional tax for people with disabilities. So that increases, although be it small, but it increases the take home for employees with disabilities. So yeah, there are a bunch of this, and the government is mulling more benefits around that.
Oh, that's very good because I think before this act came in and all these modifications came in into the incentive scheme, I've heard corporate saying that there is a lot of paperwork and very little
Yeah,
money. But
yeah,
waiving off the capping on the employee's salary and extending the timeline from 3 to 10 years, I think
yeah,
most of lots of organizations should explore, and
yeah.
they can get in touch with the disability commissioner's office of their state and the region, and they would be able to get all the details from there. So thank
Yeah,
you very
and
much.
anybody looks up for the Google, I think the order is also very easily available on the internet. Just look for incentive scheme or revised
Yeah.
incentive for FO for disability. You'll find that very prominently coming up.
Okay. The next question is, what do you think about how the act is being implemented? How many businesses are in compliance? What, in your opinion, is preventing those who still need to initiate the implementation process? So that
I
the
think the
later part
law
is
is
more important.
so I think the law has brought about a substantial difference, right? I'm always an eternalist and optimistic about the thing. So I would say कि yes, the corporates have taken a note of the new law. Uh, Thanks to all the efforts by organizations like Interweave, NASCOM, and many others, government also, they have increased awareness of the law. So the people are taking cognizance of it. A couple of years back we did a survey, and we asked different commissioners office. At that time we got to know 1,000 plus companies have registered their equal opportunity policies. I'm sure the number would have skyrocketed by now. So so people are, that is like a testimony of, yeah, people are taking cognizance of it.
Yeah.
uh, were they taking was so the point is that we need to also understand that, yeah, compliance can also be tick marked, and are we following it in the right spirit of inclusion? I think that's a journey that we still need to travel. Accessibility is something that needs to be kind of deeply thought about. It also, you need to also have the right kind of an awareness on the knowledge on accessibility, be it built environment, be it technology. So unless you are made aware of those standards, I think it's important that uh, organizations will take a little time on that. They're warming up to it. As I said, I've been hearing left, right, and center from different corporates who've initiated access audit in the last 6 months. There are tons of companies who have initiated that. With Practo's example, I'm sure the startup or the new age digital companies will also start uh, building on their accessibility of their services. So yeah, it will take time. I think India is a large, complex country. Uh, it will take its time, but I would say that we have started making good progress on that.
Good.
And by the
It's
way,
in,
the the punishment was there, and there was a movement to kind of decriminalize some of the
yeah.
punishment.
Hmm.
The sector pushed back the government, and the government was receptive, and then they actually withdrew that a kind of a amendment to the law. So yeah, the the law, although we would have liked it to be a little more sharper, but yeah, the law has some teeth to bite.
Yeah. So this was my next question, that the consequences of non-compliance. So could you just quickly say that what will happen? Means you said that some teeth have been taken away, but teeth still exist. So what are those teeth?
So it's a combination of penalties, financial penalties, and then there's also provision for imprisonment. The law says, okay, of course, the director or the partner of the company and those who are responsible for, and I'm just talking in context of the corporations, all those who are responsible for a particular decision may be kind of interrogated or maybe kind of asked or maybe trial for that. And as I mentioned, there is provision from a 10,000 rupee fine to going up to 5 lakh fine. Then there is imprisonment up to 2 years. So depending on the type of your violation, I think you can be tried for that. Maintaining data, not furnishing the data on time, I think those also has very specific penalties being mentioned in the law. So yeah, there are provisions which are enough for, I think, a corporate to be kind of to be aware of and take this a little more seriously.
Yeah, thank you. So, my next question you have kind of answered during your response to another question, but once again, I ask, what are the next steps which are being planned by the government? I understand that you were in some meeting where there something which you can tell us, that what are the especially for accessibility part, that before prior to COVID, I heard that the government is creating a committee which will review the accessibility and other aspects of the organization. So uh,
So I
is
think at
there
the
any such
center
thing?
level, na, so what is happening, Abha, is that the government is very, so the law also mandated it कि for most services, you need to create, the government was supposed to create standards on what does accessible service in that space mean. So there is a lot of effort in standardizing or codifying what accessibility means for a particular sector or an environment. So just to give you a few examples, we already have the harmonized guidelines for built environment. That guideline itself is being updated. I think the updated version should go out anytime in the next few months. In addition, what they have done is the GIGAW, which is the guidelines for Indian government apps and website, which is, by the way, the recommended standards to make your apps and website, even for the private sector, to make it accessible. Uh, there was some confusion. So what they are doing is now making the whole accessibility, digital accessibility, as a BIS, which is the Bureau of Indian Standards ka standard. So it will kind of get featured there, and there will be a notification hopefully coming out sometime in future saying, okay, you can either make it GIGAW or BIS, which is, I think, a very
Compliant.
welcome move.
Hmm.
Apart from that, there are many other consultations happening. there was a consultation by Ministry of Information and Broadcasting to make things accessible from an information content point of view. There's a health standard discussion happening on how to make healthcare more accessible. So increasingly we are seeing that RBI kind of did some consultation, and they've been kind of trying to make, there's a banking code for I think already in place for disability. So there is a lot of action happening, that and those things will start percolating down to those respective organizations also. So we will see a lot of these standards being spelled out. And I think if you are a practo which is in healthcare, so of course you are supposed to be compliant with the GIGAW, but you also need to be, if there are healthcare standards that the government lays out, then we may have to kind of be compliant to that too.
Yeah, very encouraging. One more question, that a couple of times when I have been talking to organizations, and they say that there are new building code, and then there are harmonized guidelines. I'm talking in terms of with regards to physical infrastructure accessibility. So if an organization follows the new building code, will that be considered as compliant, or they have to follow the harmonized guidelines? Are there any differences, no differences, or can you clear that ambiguity a little bit?
So I would say a large part of it, NBC and harmonized guidelines are synchronized. Uh, NBC is a very comprehensive document, and in fact, some of my friends were involved in that, and they have also gone to the extent just to not having a section on accessibility, but also cross-referencing that with, say, the relevant sections on, say, lifts or gardens or pathways. So they've cross-linked accessibility with the National Building Code also. So it's a very, very comprehensive document. If you're following that, in most cases it you should be good enough. uh, we don't know what the final draft of the new harmonized guidelines will look like, and only then there'll be a detailed study if there are differences or they're in complete alignment with the harmonized guidelines. But largely you should be okay with it, and as long as major barriers are addressed, it should be kind of taken care. Of course, the recommended guidelines or the standards are the harmonized guidelines, but NBC should also not be a problem.
Okay. Thank you. So my questions are over. It's time to take the audience's questions. And I see that there is one question which has already come in by Panini Balaji. Sometime back, he has asked this question, that if companies, is there tax benefit has been taken up? Panini Balaji asked, if companies want to hire persons with disabilities, what are the options available for them? Are there companies that specialize in persons with disability hiring?
Okay. So great. I think it's a good question, and I'll just take a step back and I'll just also kind of chart out the market.
Hmm.
Now, as per the government, 2.1% or 2.2% of the work of our employees, not employees, of our population is persons with disabilities, which is roughly about 26 million or 2.6 crores as per 2011 census. Okay? And this was based on those 7 disabilities of the PWD Act. So let me qualify that, right? Even with that conservative efforts, our population is greater than 75% of world's countries' total population. Okay? So that is a huge market in itself. Now, after the RPWD Act, our ambit has increased from 7 disabilities to 21 disabilities, which also includes conditions like dwarfism, blood related disorders, multiple sclerosis, Parkinson, and so on and so forth. So there are 21 categories of disabilities that you can hire, and that's an extended talent pool which is available for you. Uh, are there specialized agencies? Yes, there are specialized agencies in India which you can kind of find out, and they can hire them. My recommendation also in addition to your effort in looking out for, say, working with the specialized agencies, it's also in your mainstream channels. If you start insisting or kind of communicating that, yeah, we are an equal opportunity employer and we encourage applications, you will start seeing applications coming in. One of the most promising areas have been the campus recruitment. There are several education institute where there are 3 to 5% reservations. So that's a captive audience for you to look out for talent on disability. And I would say that the private sector opened up about 15 years ago in India. So you will start seeing a lot of laterals available. I know there are portals like Naukri. In fact, they even ask you if you have a disability, and then some companies have actually gone ahead and asked some, proactively hired based on those disclosures. So yeah, there are bunch of talent source or pools available. I would recommend you make your mainstream process as accessible and inclusive, in addition to the focused efforts that you are trying to make.
Yeah, thank you. So I see in the comments there are participants who have been answering this question. So I think Panini would have gotten some ideas from there as well. Next question. This is a statement. Hiring them as freelancer part-time employees count, or they should be on the payroll of the company? Why they he?
So again, I don't think so. The law has very specifically mentioned about this. Um, I think this is something which is up for debate, and maybe I can also cross check with my team and come back to you. But I think if you have an employee mix of, say, say out of 100, you have 10% as freelancers, 20% as part time, and 70% for fixed. I would recommend you maintain a similar proportion as far as hiring with disabilities also. Don't say कि, okay, I'm only going to hire freelancers, which will be like my dominant for people with disabilities. Again, those could be construed in different ways. So as long as you have a larger policy and your hiring practices are in alignment with for people with disabilities, I think you should be okay. But I think gig economy, freelancing, these are now becoming increasingly prominent. So it's not that you can't shy away from something like this.
Yeah. And main thing is that for private sector organization, there is no quota. So
There's
it
no quota.
goes up to you how you want to hire. But what Ankit said is basically mirror what you're hiring for the regular employees, the same way you hire persons with disability also. So
Yeah.
Manjula's question has already been taken up. I see. What are other incentive besides fear of lawsuits as mentioned to encourage compliance for private sector companies? Can you name a few incentives? I think
Okay.
this question was also answered by Ankit, unless and until you want to add something.
Let me just put this across in a different way, right? Of course, we talked about the FO
Hmm.
reimbursement, right? But when you talk about incentive, I think inclusion, and it's just not about hiring people, it's about having an inclusive mindset for people with disabilities. And I often give this example: when you hire people with disabilities in your organization, you make your products and services also more inclusive and accessible for a wider audience. Now, how does that translate to your revenue? I'll give you an example where I say, for instance, I there are two major transport apps, right? Ola and Uber, that we all aware of. Now, Uber traditionally has been a lot more accessible with my screen readers, and Ola wasn't traditionally very accessible. Now, I pivoted to Uber several years ago, right? And I've been very sticky customer with Uber. Uh, as a result, looking at me, the rest of my family members, the 7-member family, they've all pivoted to Uber. Now, Uber got 7 sticky customers. Ola lost those customers. Now, we all know how companies struggle to make their customer base more sticky. So this might be an incentive or an insight which a disabled employer, for whatever reason, Uber decided to make it accessible, and they got the business. So there are hardcore business benefits that is available, uh, and those insights can only come in when you have a more diverse workforce and hiring people with disabilities. Hire them for the talent or the insights they bring in, not for the charity that we want to do. Right? You will see a lot of different perspective that these companies will or these this workforce will bring into your table.
Yeah,
And as I
I think
mentioned,
that,
government, you can't do business if sooner you start seeing that government will also start becoming more stringent on accessibility.
yeah, yeah, most important thing, hire them for the skills they have. And there are,
Yeah.
I think, there are many skilled people out there who will be waiting for you to hire them. So
Absolutely.
look at them for skills and for the other benefits they get it. Now,
And it's an
Aditya Batavia has
exploratory,
a question. Sorry.
sorry. Now, I was just saying it's a very exploratory thing also. Please,
Yeah,
while there are a lot of templates available, okay,
yeah,
people with disabilities are fitting well in this job. I would say have an open mindset and explore, push the boundaries, give them newer roles, and you will be surprised how they have contributed.
yep. So Aditya's question is: if an employee is working from home, will wheelchair can wheelchair be considered as a reasonable accommodation?
So yeah, there are organizations who has provided wheelchair for say employees coming to an office. They were not able to do it, so they will even in fact there are companies who have even bought electric wheelchairs, and then some of them also allow that wheelchair to be taken home. So yeah, there are companies who have done that. Even there are companies who also say कि if you're buying say license of assistive technology, say like the screen reader jaws, now if you leave that organization, some companies actually allow employee to take it along with them, so they don't capitalize that. So yeah, there are different companies who have kind of interpreted this and expanded on this, and wheelchair is also provided as a part of different accommodation. We need to also be cognizant of this fact that wheelchair is a little more nuanced than what many of us really understand. Wheelchairs are not very standard. Many wheelchairs are made custom to a person's own need. So you know you so they may demand for a certain type of wheelchair which is specially designed. So those are individual conversations that you may want to take up. But yeah, there's no one size fits all with wheelchair.
Yeah. So Urvi Chaya asks that if one is just starting on this journey, is it important to do accessibility audit and then go ahead with hiring?
So I think everything is it's not sequential. Some of it could be, parallel activities. Now, accessibility audit could be a parallel activity that you could initiate for your built environment. Because see, while accessible, there are several types of disability which are very invisible disabilities, and they may not even need many of the accessibility features. Say, like for example, blood related conditions, or
Yeah,
many of those mental illness or psychosocial disabilities. They don't necessarily need any accessibility accommodation. Yeah, there are certain aspects of lighting and sound which are covered in the accessibility audit, but I think you should be in a position to start hiring many other types of disabilities. The idea is that with access audit, you'll also start being aware that where a potential barrier may exist for a type of disability. So we may not realize, but yeah, we might have seen a ramp in front of our building and we think our building is accessible for wheelchair, but we may not, the thought have never come to us, okay, we need an accessible toilet, or there are some others, there's this one step somewhere in the path. So those things, I think an access audit will surface to you and will make you more aware, but it can be a parallel activity and it doesn't have to be a series or a sequential activity.
yep,
Start small, keep small goals, and I think keep building on it. I think that's important. Be consistent on that.
yeah. Malika Walia asks what all aspects are covered in accessibility audit.
Okay, so there are access audit for built environment, there are access audit for digital. Now these are two different skill sets, and there are two different types of audits which are done. Now when we talk about digital accessibility, they talk about web content accessibility. There is a very specific guidelines and parameters which are given. It's a very codified law. So standards, you can refer to that and you can get this, and then there are specialized agencies which does that. When you talk about built environment, it really starts from your, basically it's an built environment for your office premises, and it really starts from your transport to entrance, your pathways, your building, your staircase, your lift, uh, what do you say, washrooms, even having like a cafeteria, and where the how your food trays are there. Do you have a reception which is, again, the reception desk which is accessible enough? um, Having your coffee machine, and I give this very interesting example. Most of our coffee machines are getting replaced with this very sophisticated touchscreen thing, and not many realize that it is completely inaccessible for somebody like me who relied on those tactile buttons. So now we would have got more advanced as far as coffee, but I became more dependent because of the new machines. So we need to be a little more cognizant. While there is a harmonized guideline, there are international standards for built environment. We need to really start thinking also, if you're bringing a new element like a coffee machine or any new element in your built environment, think how is it going to affect those who cannot see, who cannot use their limbs, who cannot hear. Are there accommodation or changes that we need to bring in? A lot of companies have started insisting and started to include accessibility as a procurement criteria. So be it for built environment, be it for digital products, they started insisting on accessibility. So yeah, those are, I think, elements that we need to kind of look into it. And accessibility of built environment covers a lot of things.
Yeah. So Smita Uchel asks another related question that what if we are not able to implement all the recommendations?
What if we are not able to? I think as long as we are moving ahead, of course, if you do an audit, and this is again, there's nothing very articulated in the law or the rules, but the fact is, even the government understands accessibility can take time. As long as you have the audit, as long as you have the roadmap, and as long as you're showing progress on that roadmap, people should be fine, right? Because some of it may require bigger investments, bigger budgets, in some cases. So those can be phased out, phased in different milestones. But as long as you're showing that progress towards that path, I think we need to kind of we should be good.
Yeah, I would like to add here, like in our company, Social Equity, we provide a priority list, and we give the priority one or two to the recommendations which are very important for a person with disability of any kind of disabilities. So that way they can create their roadmap easily, and they
Yeah,
can start implementing the priority one and priority two recommendations, and where they need more budget, and maybe sometimes talk to the builders, that can be taken care a little later, but at
yeah,
least there is a roadmap, as you said.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So Prerna Vagla is asking, any other policy for persons with disabilities at the workplace?
Any other policy? I think, see, the equal opportunity policy is at least what is being mandated by the law. But again, companies may have their own expansions of the same, and the spirit of how they see disability inclusion at the workplace, right? So for example, now reasonable accommodation could become a standalone policy in many cases, and which may articulate different aspects of reasonable accommodation. You could talk about accommodation in terms of flexi work,
Yeah.
work from home, acquiring assistive technologies, getting specialized leaves. It can also be expanded on things like travel. Say if I am traveling, would I be eligible to kind of take a buddy along with me? Um and so on and so forth, because again, the more you're going to expand on it, I think the better clarity it becomes and lesser ambiguity is there. um, I, I think, yeah, that's important. I think also some organization has a centralized budget for accommodation, and some kind of apportion that cost of accommodation to the individual business units. So those are called, again, of strategic calls that you can take.
Yeah. So generally, in what I've seen, that organizations also review their other policies and see what
Yeah,
are connected with the equal opportunity policy. And you have mentioned the travel pass policy, the transport, the leave policy, and so on and so forth. Because if anybody is having a disability like blood related disorders, then person might have to go take leave to go for blood transfusions or some other kind of treatment. So
Yeah.
that can be added as a reasonable accommodation.
Yeah. So a lot of
Um,
companies have actually started doing policy audit. Now
yeah.
you could do it in context of your own understanding, or you could actually engage with consultants like Abha, Diok, and many
Mm,
others who
yeah.
could help you with the access audit or policy audits. So
Yes.
that's another audit. Sorry, but yeah.
Yeah. I don't see any other question. Uh, so I think it's about time we are over the time limit. So I would like to thank you, Ankit, for explaining everything so clearly and hand it over to Smita. So over to you, Smita. Thank you.
Thank you, Abba. Thank you, Ankit. I must say this has been quite useful and insightful session for all of us. And, very importantly, to thank our participants for making this session very engaging with pertinent questions. Our next event is on the 22nd September, next Thursday. This event will focus on hiring, talent development, and accessibility at the workplace. We have an interesting lineup of speakers, and this will be a panel discussion format. So please go ahead and register for this in case you haven't done it already and spread the word. So, with this, we will close the session. Thank you and see you all next week. Bye.
Thank you very much.